We have Dr. Bret Cormier with us today. He received his Doctorate of Education from the University of Texas. He's the Associate Professor at the University of Missouri-Columbia and is the Southeast Comprehensive Doctoral Program Site Coordinator for SEMO there. And Dr. Cormier was actually one of my instructors for the ED.D program, and he focused a lot on cultural competence there, so I'm really excited to have him presenting for us today. So Dr. Cormier, I will mute our line, and you can give your hello and start your screen share whenever you are ready.
All right, let me share my screen. Make sure that it's working. All right, can everybody see that?
We can.
All right, good morning. I should say good afternoon, I apologize. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dr. Cormier, and I'll be talking to you all for hopefully next 40-45 minutes. If you have any questions while I'm talking, please feel free to interject. You don't have to wait until the end. Basically, even though my primary experience is in P-12 schools, former teacher, former principal, certified superintendent, there are a lot of similarities between the work that you all do in the medical profession, similar to the work that we do in public schools, now in higher ed, particularly working at state institutions, where we're largely having to serve broad swaths of the population. So unlike many organizations that tend to be private, where you can kind of pick and choose your clientele, if you work in public schools, if you work at a state institution, or like you all are working in medical professions, you're largely serving all aspects of the community: urban, rural, suburban, urban, new immigrants, international populations, and folks from low-income backgrounds. So it requires you to be significantly more skilled to work with that population. And so a lot of what I'm going to talk about has to do with that. So there will be some similarities between your organizations and the work that I do with P-12 teachers and leaders, particularly training them and preparing them to also work and lead in a diverse context. So I want to give that little aside before we get started. Let me go ahead and silence my, I just have it there because I don't have a clock. All right, so I'm going to talk about moving from cultural awareness to cultural competence, which I think is the goal for most of us, and I'm going to hope that my clicker is working, because it was working when we tested it beforehand. And of course, now that we're live, it's not working. All right, there we go. All right, so these are kind of like the objectives of the presentation that I'm going to talk to you guys about today. Just kind of give you some terminology, try to give you a context, trying to talk about where some of the disconnects take place when working with diverse populations. The second thing is largely those of us who are trying to become more culturally competent, addressing our worldview and where we can have some disconnects. All right, and so then my goal is for you all to walk away from this talk, this presentation, kind of understanding your role when you are leading or working in an organization, particularly as you are trying to transform the organization and make it more multicultural, make it more cultural competent. Basically, an organization that can serve and meet the needs of the population where we are now, as we are at the tail end of 2018, moving into 2019, as we embark on the third decade of the 21st century. So that is critically what we are trying to do. So everyone has an experience that great soul wound. So like Maya Angelou says, there's no greater agony than bearing, and of course, let me move my camera so I can see that. Inside you. So one of the big disconnects about dealing with cultural competencies and working in a multicultural organization, I would argue, are largely, for a lot of us, we have to have our illusions shattered. So I would like everybody to think for a second, when you hear things in the news and the media, so largely every few months, it seems like now, we have some incident involving law enforcement and a member of a community where there's some type of an interaction, and largely a binary is created. So i.e., if an African-American male is shot and killed by the police under mysterious circumstances. We largely have certain folks who will immediately side with the police. Other folks will immediately side with the individual from a community that represents themselves. And I'm not trying to get into that, but the reason I'm using this as an example is to kind of alliterate what Maya Angelou was talking about, and also where soul wounds come into play. The point being is everybody has a story. And often for a lot of folks, when they hear, going back to the law enforcement example for a second, when they hear about the police engaging suspect, potential suspect, citizen, whatever you would like to say, and then finding out that this person may have been wrongfully killed, often folks have a hard time believing it and are always going to assume something negative about the individual that may have been injured or killed in the confrontation, because they're like, well, you know, our police are well trained, they're competent, they're there to protect and serve. There's no way that they would make this kind of mistake. I just don't believe that. These folks must have been doing something. And that's largely where the disconnect begins. Because instead of kind of taking the situation, waiting for all the facts to come in before we make a determination, folks always want to prejudge or predetermine the outcome or the situation. And I would argue in our role as professionals and leaders, we cannot do that. We have to wait for the facts to come in. Where the soul wound comes into play, primarily now take this to the micro level with the work that we're doing in the communities that we work in and that we serve. If we automatically come in with a preconceived set of notions or ideas about the folks we're working with, the communities they come from, the circumstances they may be coming to us with, and we have prejudged that, automatically that creates a disconnect, and it's going to be very difficult for us to form rapport, i.e. respect that individual. That's going to lead to trust so that we can serve them, try to meet their needs, try to help them do whatever it is they came to us to do. And so I would argue it's incumbent upon all of us to have an open mind. So that's why you used that example. So let me kind of start with a clip, because often when we talk about this, folks always assume we're talking about diversity. And so I'll be honest with you all, I'm not a diversity guy. I don't really know what diversity means in that context. I'm largely talking to you all about cultural competencies, which is what I talk to leaders about, which is, as you'll see later on, is developing a set of behaviors, a system, and things that allow us to hold each other accountable for the things that we do and don't do. So I'm not talking about diversity in the broad sense of let's have meals, let's talk about other people's fashions and things of that nature. So let me show you this quick video. All right, anyone have any thoughts about what you saw? Any comments?
None here.
No comments, no thoughts?
They laughed.
Yes, it was fairly offensive. That's not what we're going to do today, okay? And I kind of use that to alliterate. That's largely what a lot of folks think diversity training is, particularly when it's handled by folks who don't do any work in that area, don't really have any expertise in the area, and kind of feed on stereotypes. So that's exactly what we're not going to do. And so that's why we're going to talk more about cultural competence. All right, so let's continue.
Go ahead and share your screen again.
Okay, am I not sharing my screen? So you guys can't see my screen again? Sorry about that. Let me go back. You can see I'm having all kinds of problems with the technology. All right. There we go. Sorry about that. Okay, so kind of like the question I like to ask everyone is, and this is kind of how I start the work, is how does it feel to be a problem, coming from the work of Du Bois and his seminal text, The Souls of Black Folks? Now, when he asked this question, he was talking to African Americans. He was asking, how does it feel to be a problem in terms of being African American in the United States? And he would argue that the color line was the greatest problem of the 20th century. I'm not necessarily arguing that. Clearly, we know we still have racial and ethnic and social differences as we have moved into the 21st century, okay? But what I would argue is a lot of the people that we are serving are what I would call non-dominant group members. So meaning low-income folks of color, low-income white folks, folks who come from, who are low-income, live and working in urban and rural contexts or suburban urban contexts. They tend to be blue-collar, working class. They're either new immigrants, they may be international students here on visas that we work with and serve. They may be members of the LGBTQ community. So basically anyone that falls outside of what we would call the American mainstream are the dominant group. And those are largely who the students that I work with and train are largely serving members of the non-dominant group communities. And so it is incumbent for us to understand that, because a lot of those individuals are framed as problems. And they often feel that way based on some of the prejudice, the bigotry, some of the judgment and prejudgments that they encounter. So it's important for us to be aware of that when we're serving those communities, particularly if they do not initially trust us or trust the organizations that we work with, even though we're saying, hey, we're coming to work with you, we're coming to work within the context of the community, and we're here to help. So initially, folks are not like, oh, thank you for showing up and helping us, and we love that you're here. Understand that is part of the issue, and we just have to push through that. So when you look at the 2010 census, these are largely a lot of the groups we are now serving. And so I'm not going to read all of them to you, you can see them, but you can see the amount of diversity that has taken place if you even go back to the 2000 census, where we had like 4 groups in that group. Now you can see we have over 16. And who knows what will happen when the 2020 census happens here in the next couple of years and it's reported on. So obviously the United States is becoming increasingly more diverse as we are hitting population levels of 320 million folks in our country. All right, so these are things that influence how we see the world and initially influence our interaction. So obviously your social class, your gender, or if you are not defining your gender, the region of the country you may be from, whether you are religious, spiritual, agnostic, or atheist, whether you have a disability, a handicap, or an impairment, the member of the ethnic group that you are part of, your race or ethnicity, your political affiliation or lack of a political affiliation, and obviously your sexual orientation. So these are the things that largely impact how we see the world, but I want you to think in terms of how we begin to formulate our capital T truths, meaning our core beliefs. What are the things that we really believe about the world, about the people in the world, about our place in the world as either natural born citizens to the United States or folks who have immigrated to the United States? How do we feel about those things? Because those largely shape the formation of our early values. And so the reason that I put this up here is because one of the most difficult conflicts to overcome, as I think you all probably would attest to, are value conflicts. And those are one of the things that really impede cultural competence. And we'll talk more about that. So I'm going to just run through some definitions quickly so we all can agree on what we're talking about before we get into the meat of this. So what does diversity mean? Inclusion of individuals representing more than one national origin, color, religion, socioeconomic stratum, sexual orientation, so on and so forth, similar to the list I put up before. Now, what does diversity mean for an organization? And this is where we can kind of unpack some of these notions. Well, obviously that means our organization has to change, it has to grow, it may need to be transformative. It means kind of expanding our viewpoints. And what do I mean by that? So when you think diversity, when you think moving toward cultural competencies, you want to think more broadly, first off, about what are the governance structures we have in our organization? Meaning, what are some of the practices? What are the protocols? How do we feel about broadening the mission and the vision of the organization? And so that's why it says moving beyond tolerance to mutual respect and understanding, because you understand our mission and vision can say we want to be a pluralistic organization. We strive to want to be a culturally competent organization, and all the members, leaders, members, and employees of the organization will have the knowledge to serve the broad swath of the community and the broader community that we work and live in. That could be a goal. But when you then go to governance, do we have policies in place that are not welcoming to members of our organization? So you're talking about, we could have policies going back to the 1990s, even though we're in 2018, And some of that may conflict with our new mission and vision that we put forth in 2015. As we move into 2018 and we're saying, hey, it's time for us to look at our strategic plan. Let's take a look at our 5-year plan, our 10-year plan. But do some of these protocols that we have in place around hiring, where before we may say, hey, we don't hire folks who have a disability or impairment and put them in a leadership role? Do we have policies in place that say, well, we can't have anyone in leadership who's a member of the LGBTQ community? So even though we are espousing that and no one is personally going around twirling their mustache and saying, hey, I'm going to discriminate against some folks who don't look like me, but yet our governance and our policies may actively be discriminating against and working against. They may be antithetical to what our mission and vision say we want, and even those of us in the organization that are working toward that. Does that make sense to everybody? And so these are the kind of things that I'm talking about. So I'm not necessarily talking about folks who are being outwardly hostile to various members of our community. That we see that, but that's a small percentage of what we're talking about. It's largely the things that I just enumerated to you in terms of policy, in terms of governance, because obviously we don't go back and look at policy. We often don't go back and look at handbooks and update that. And as you all know, often we don't continue, our training does not spiral. It's kind of like, okay, you've done this training when you first came into the organization, and that's it. We don't do any more training. We may do a refresher, that's a PowerPoint or whatnot, but we're largely not interacting like we're interacting here. And so these are the kind of things to be aware of, because this impedes cultural competence. So again, it's not kind of like the things that we saw in the stereotypical video where folks are kind of saying crazy and inappropriate things. It's largely policies that drive the organization that we don't revisit on a day in, day out basis. Okay. So I think you guys can all work with this quote, the things that we kind of get used to. All right, so during times of universal deceit, telling the truth becomes a revolutionary act. That quote is there because of this. So how many of you have seen The Matrix? Just by a show of hands are familiar with it, you've heard about it. I know some of you are much younger than I am, which is fine. So I'll tell you why I'm using this metaphor. So I'm going to show you, we'll watch another clip. It's about 3 minutes, like the last clip. This clip should not be offensive. All right, so the reason that I use that, going back to what I talked about at the beginning with soul wounds and shattering illusions, are at some point, as much as we love the United States and the country that we live in and work in, we have to acknowledge that there are certain truths that exist. And that's one of the first steps to become more culturally competent and being effective and efficient with working with populations of folks who don't come from where we come from and don't look like us. So when you think in terms of the blue pill, where largely now you all know that there are certain uncomfortable truths that exist in the US, you can either choose to accept those truths and you can approach them realistically and deal with them, or you can be a naysayer and say that doesn't exist. Those people are lying, whatever the case may be. And that is kind of what could quickly end your journey toward being a culturally competent leader. So when you think of the blue pill, think of power, privilege, ethnocentrism, hegemony, inequality, basically the many things that our organizations are fighting against to serve and do the good work that we do, whether it be education, in the health profession, healthcare profession, whatever the case may be. So be thinking about power and privilege and that push-pull and what we are fighting against. Okay, and obviously being aware of cultural norms, customs, behaviors, so on and so forth. So this represents the blue pill. So that's why I feel like that scene and the blue pill and the red pill very much helps us along our journey toward being culturally competent. All right, so this is the impact of America not accepting the blue pill and us rejecting that, saying, we love our country, we know we can be better, and we need to work to lessen inequality. And remember what society does to its children will do to society, Cicero. Because obviously, as we know, we can tell folks how we feel about something, but we know children learn a lot more from watching their parents and adults than listening to what we say. And so obviously we have to model what we communicate. So going back to the mission and the vision of our organization. If our mission and our vision say that we are going to service the full community and we are going to be culturally competent professionals, then obviously our behavior needs to model that. Because that's what folks are looking at. They're not going to spend a lot of time listening to our rhetoric. They're largely going to pay attention to how we behave, how we conduct ourselves, and do they feel welcome when they come into our buildings, into our structures, and encounter folks in our organization. Now, this is the red pill. The red pill, if you choose to accept the red pill, like Neo did in The Scene, that means that you're open to diversity. That means that you want to create multicultural and pluralistic organizations. That eventually you want to be a culturally competent leader and a professional. Okay? That means that you understand that diversity exists in the 21st century, that while diversity can be uncomfortable, while we know change can be uncomfortable for all of us, and sometimes we'll push back against that, we ultimately know that change is the revolutionary act that we need for us to continue to grow as citizens, as professionals, as people, as humans. And so that means we have to embrace diversity, we have to embrace cultural competencies, we have to acknowledge the things that we are uncomfortable with, and we have to challenge our core beliefs and our capital T truths. And we also need to advocate against those structures when they prevent pluralistic acceptance within our organizations that we work in and lead. Okay? So those are those terms. So do we all live in the same America, which is a question that many folks ask. So this is from the playwright Langston Hughes. I swear to the Lord, I still can't see why democracy means everyone but me. Because often, this is how some of the folks who will come into our organizations will feel. And sometimes they may take that out on you in your role as a leader or a member of the organization that they do not trust. And sometimes we take that personally, and we can't afford to take that personally because remember, this is their experience. This is their lived experience. And we have to acknowledge this is your experience. It's not your experience with me. I respect your experiences, but let's not allow that to impede the relationship that we need to build professionally so that I can work with you and help you help your child or help your family. Okay? So another quote. So these are, and now we're going to get to the meat of it before your questions. So we've got about 15 minutes. So I want to hit these last 4 or 5 slides and go into some detail and have some dialogue with you all. So please feel free to comment, ask questions so we can dialogue. I don't want to just lecture to you for these last 12 minutes. So these are some of the goals that we want as we make our organizations more multicultural, i.e. becoming more culturally competent. We want organizational equity. So that means that we want folks who look like all of us, look like the world, i.e. a global society, to be in leadership roles, to be in roles of authority, to have roles of expertise. So whether they're training us, leading us in budget and finance, whether they're surgeons, whatever the case may be, we want the best folks, regardless of their gender, sexual orientation, whatever the case may be. We just want highly competent individuals to work in our organizations. That allows our organizations to continue to be dynamic and continue to be transformative and stay on the cutting edge of knowledge, technology, and science. If our organizations don't have that, it becomes very difficult for our organizations to remain dynamic because that means we don't have the amount of talent, skill, and knowledge that we need if we are not tapping all segments of the world to find the best people to meet our mission, if that makes sense to everyone. So secondly is cultural pluralism. What does that mean? That means that we truly want our organizations to be representative of the world, of a global society, so that we don't have a broad swath of the community that comes into play. So I'll give you an example of what I mean. So when I worked at the district level office in the Austin Independent School District in the early aughts, many of you may or may not be familiar with the Hurricane Katrina that took place in the Gulf Coast region and really hit New Orleans and the state of Louisiana very difficult. As a result of that, my school district got 1,000 students who came from New Orleans. We had to try to work to place those students, work with their families, find them housing, and many of them were going to be housed in East Austin, which is the historical African American, Latino, and low-income white community of Austin. So there were some huge cultural differences from kids and parents coming from New Orleans, coming to Texas, coming to East Austin, and we began to feel those cultural impacts in our elementary schools, our middle schools, our high schools, within the social service organizations that we were trying to provide services for parents. And there were a lot of disconnect because one, initially folks were like, hey, we have a lot of Black people in place in these organizations, and these are mostly Black people coming from New Orleans. So they have a lot of commonality, and there was very little commonality other than the fact that they shared similar skin tone. But culturally, very different, linguistically, very different set of expectations, educationally, very different. And our organizations had to become dynamic and had to really begin to learn and really had to grow so that we could serve our students and our families that came from New Orleans and who were also dealing with the trauma of losing their homes, losing family members. So it was very significant. And that is when we first realized that our organization was not culturally pluralistic, even though you could have gotten all of us to swear that we were. But really dealing with a tragedy on the ground and realizing just how inept and unprepared we were to deal with that caused us to really rethink some things. And we really had to grow and take a hard look in the mirror and say, what do we need to do to get better? And so that's what a lot of organizations have to do. So obviously around human relations, a big part of those human relations start with one question. Often when you know someone is not really culturally competent is when someone responds in a way that we don't like, they may be inappropriate, they may be disrespectful, and our first thought is, what in the world is wrong with you that you are responding this way when I've done nothing but try to help you? And that's not really the ideal response, particularly for folks in our profession doing the work that we do. You heard me mention previously the trauma of the students and the families coming from New Orleans and coming from Louisiana. So really the question we should be asking when folks respond in a way that may be disrespectful to us or they don't feel like we are here to help is what happened to you? Why is it's difficult for you to build rapport? Why is it's difficult for you to trust me or trust the organization or trust that I'm here to do the things that I say that I'm going to do? And that immediately allows you to begin to build a relationship. Because folks who are dealing with trauma, as I think many of you all know since you work with a lot of those same folks, just like we do in education, a big part of dealing with trauma and them lessening their response to trauma and lessening their fight, flight, or freeze response is obviously the ability to build rapport, to build relationship, that you can respect their circumstance, i.e. what John Maxwell calls professional maturity, which just means, can we see someone else's viewpoint? Can we see someone else's frame of reference that will allow us to build rapport? Even if we disagree, we can still work together professionally. So that is a big part of being culturally competent. So as you can see, these things are very simple, but they're also highly complex if we don't have the skill set and we don't have the will to implement these type of strategies in our organizations and really allow our organizations to grow. So social reconstruction is very critical. So going back to the reason I chose that scene in The Office, because you know certain things are socially reconstructed when all of us can point to them. So a lot of the stereotypes you saw in that video that many of us have heard, stereotypes about women, Asians, other folks of color that were mentioned there, those we know are largely socially reconstructed, which means these are stereotypes that many of us have accepted as truths. We've accepted them as fact when largely they could be based on an element of fact, but they've largely been exaggerated. And so we have to really challenge the notion of those reconstruction, of these social reconstructions, and really begin to deal with science, deal with hard fact, deal with empiricism. And we have to push back against those stereotypes and say, well, this is not accurate. I may have had an encounter with someone from this gender or this culture, but that doesn't mean that everyone from that culture is a monolith and they all would respond this way to this set of stimuli or circumstances. So we have to push back on that. We have to constantly be evolving and challenging. Obviously, then one of the hardest parts of becoming a multicultural organization is cross-cultural competence. What does that mean? So as we unpack cross-cultural competence is, one, part of cultural competence, which I'll show you the definition here in the next couple of slides. So I'll come back to cross-cultural competence after I show you the definition. And obviously, as I've talked about, in the theme of everything we've talked about thus far, is how do we fully integrate all these different groups, the diversity of the world? How does that become part of that? How do we continue to grow our skill set? How do we continue to grow our knowledge base? How do we begin to understand some of the historical inequities that have taken place? And obviously, that can happen through training, that happens through our college programs, that happens through our leadership programs. And then obviously, just the reading that we do and trying to be conversant with world issues. No one says you have to be an expert in these issues. But when significant things have happened in our society, you should be made aware of them, and the organization should be made aware of them. And you all should be talking about them, going back to what I referenced previously. Governance structures, practices, protocols, policy within the organization. Is your policy constantly evolving, not remaining static, so that you continue to move toward cultural competence, multicultural plurality, those type of issues? All right, so organizational equity. So I kind of gave you broad strokes. These are questions that you can ask about each one of those sets. And these are questions to help you move toward being culturally competent. You know, so cultural pluralism, like I touched on. Okay. Same thing with human relations. Okay, we talked about social reconstruction. So, like I said, I would come back to this. So, do we have knowledge of shared culture? Do we have knowledge of other cultures? How knowledgeable are folks in our organization of the core constituency that we serve? So, if some of you work in a rural context, how familiar are you with the issues that folks in the rural community that you work in and serve? Are you aware of their challenges? Are you aware of their struggles? Are you aware of the economic difficulties? Are you aware of some of the health disparities? Are you aware of those things, and how are you all combating that? How are you addressing that when you encounter members of those communities? Are the communities you're working in, are folks working class, blue collar, are many on disability? How does that impact the quality of care, the quality of service that we provide? You really need to know about those organizations. It's critically important that we know who you're serving. Okay, so I talked about that. All right, so these are I'll show these last recited definitions that we get close to 12:45, and then we'll take some questions from you all and some comments, and we'll have some dialogue as we get to the end. So obviously, operational definition, cultural competence, is basically your ability to understand and appreciate persons from other cultures, other belief systems other than your own, largely what I've been talking about the past 20 plus minutes. Obviously, being aware of culture, okay, which is a body of knowledge, a body of belief, and I'll talk about how culture really impacts the work that we do as we kind of close. All right, this is the operational definition of cultural competence. Set of congruent behaviors, attitudes, policies that come together in a system, agency, organization, among professionals that allow you to work effectively in cross-cultural situations, i.e. cultural competency largely dictates the operational behaviors that we have and provides a set of structures so that folks are violating these policies and practices and protocols. There is a sense of accountability. Why is that important? Okay. That becomes important because largely what really governs organizations and what we as leaders are trying to do is we're trying to create a climate and i.e. a culture in the organization. Leaders create the culture of the organization. Culture largely drives our behavior. All right, and that behavior produces results. So why is that important? So if culture is what we believe, how we behave, this is also how we hold each other accountable when we fall short in some of these areas. And this is also how we continue to develop our professional development goals, our professional development objectives, because we know where we are falling short and we know where we need to be held accountable so that we can be highly effective and efficient serving our community and serving our core constituency. And so culture in an organization drives all of these things. It determines attitude and effort, and as leaders and as members of an organization, we have to believe in our culture, we have to sell our culture, and we have to demand that everyone is adhering to our culture. And if folks cannot adhere to our culture, which become in conflict with our goals and objectives of serving our core constituency, then sometimes those members have to be removed from our organization. It happens, it's rare, but it happens, and we can't be afraid to have those conversations. That's what you all as leaders have to do. All right, so these are just some final questions that you have to ask yourself if you truly want to be a culturally competent professional. Can we accept and acknowledge that inequality exists in our society? And so again, this comes back to these are your core questions about accepting the red pill or the blue pill. As culturally competent professionals, I know you all will accept the red pill. And so these are other questions, and I'm skipping slides because we don't have a lot of time. And so I want to show you all one last video, and then we'll have our discussion. This is my last video for you all. So in closing, what I'd say to you all is, the reason I showed you that is, the first part of being the change that you want to see in the world starts with you. That you change your attitudes, it impacts your values, your beliefs, your professional behavior. And once you're able to make that shift within yourself, then that allows you to advocate for your core constituency, and that allows you to challenge the inequality that you see in the organization. And sometimes that means confronting colleagues who are not as skillful and as culturally competent as they need to be, but you can have those conversations respectfully. But it is important if you want your organization to remain dynamic and you want it to remain on the cutting edge and you want it to be able to live out its core mission and its core objectives, that you must be that change that you want to see in the world, i.e. in your organization. So thank you, and now we have time for comments, questions, whatever the case may be.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. I know that was fast and furious, and I know there have to be some comments out there. So come on, ladies and gentlemen, let's have some dialogue for these last 7-8 minutes.
They're kind of quiet sometimes.
I know, this is fun. So let me ask you guys a question then. So what are some of the challenges you feel like exist in the organizations that you all work in that may be a barrier to the organization becoming a multicultural organization, or everyone in the organization truly becoming culturally competent? And you don't have to identify your organization, but just kind of throw out a challenge that we can discuss.
So have any of you seen anything in your hospitals or clinics?
You guys have anything?
I guess every place is perfect.
I guess.
Any of the other sites have any questions or comments?
Specific to me.
We've got a comment here. Just talk about it.
Okay, good, finally.
Something that is more general with medical professionals in general, the training is incredibly expensive. And there's loans and there's a loan process, but just getting to that point requires over $1,000 of testing, the expectation that you can travel on a whim for interviews, the expectation that you have nice clothes for an interview, and there's more and more like pre-testing resources out there, but that are thousands of dollars. And so just being a competitive applicant takes thousands of dollars. And so there's a lot of recent effort in trying to make the medical field as diverse as the patient populations they're treating. But yet there is a lag on this, and a huge part of that reason is because it's straight up expensive to get into medical school. It's expensive to stay in medical school. And so that's something that we notice, and I think we need to get better at as medical schools, at both acknowledging that, and then secondly, having some sort of system where there's a high school to medical school pipeline, and having more available and advertised aid for it. Because there are other scholarships, there's certain scholarships somewhere, even for taking the MCAT, there's a way to take it and get reimbursed for that price, but it's very difficult to find and not always accessible. And so I think that's something that the medical profession can do in general to help with that representation.
That's an excellent comment. Anyone want to respond to that before I do? Any thoughts about that? Because that is a real concern. And she's absolutely correct. That is one of the things that impacts the economic, ethnic, and regional diversity of our providers. And we see comparable things in terms of folks who want to be leaders in higher education are in K-12, i.e. at the superintendent level, needing to have a doctorate and, to your point, take multiple exams, certification exams to get into graduate and doctoral programs. And therefore that impacts our diversity as well in terms of who are sitting in our classrooms and who have access to these world-class educations, and then eventually these high-paying jobs and occupations and leadership roles. So that is critical. Thoughts? I think that's an apt point in terms of things that impact our ability to be dynamic and having folks be more representative of the communities that we work in and serve.
I don't see any more questions here.
No more questions? No more comments?
It's very good. Well, thank you, sir.
Well, thank you all. Thank you all for your time and your attention. Good luck with your studies. Everybody have a safe and happy holiday, and a happy year as well.
We will. Thank you so much. I'll touch base with you a little bit later, okay?
Okay, that sounds great.
All right. Thank you.
All right, thank you all again. Have a good rest of your day.
You too.